Imagine this, a world where the greatest powers, these huge, sprawling empires, just suddenly vanish.
It's hard to picture, isn't it?
Yeah, cities just burn, kings disappear like without a trace. And even writing systems, sophisticated ways of communicate, they just stop,
Poof, gone.
gone. Sounds like fantasy, right? But this actually happened over 3,000 years ago. The Bronze Age collapse. It's one of history's biggest mysteries.
Absolutely profound. And baffling.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really plunging into this enigma, the Bronze Age collapse, which shook the ancient world around, what, 1200 BCE?
Roughly, yeah. That's the focal point.
Well, we'll be digging through the historical accounts, the archaeology, trying to piece together what happened at this really pivotal moment. Our mission, really, is to try and unpack this incredibly tangled web of events. What led to this huge catastrophe? What was the immediate impact like for, ordinary people?
Which often gets overlooked.
Yeah, exactly. And then, surprisingly, what kind of rebirth, what new beginnings actually came out of all that destruction?
The seeds of renewal, yeah.
We want to show you just how connected that ancient world really was, and maybe what lessons this whole ancient upheaval might hold for us today.
It's surprisingly relevant.
Okay, so to really get the scale of this collapse, we need to, set the stage first.
Yeah.
What was the world like before it all fell apart?
Right. The so-called Golden Age of the Late Bronze Age. Say 1500 to 1200 BCE.
And you described it before as maybe the world's first globalized era.
In a way, yeah, it's a useful comparison. You had these superpowers dominating the scene.
Like Egypt, right. Controlling the Nile, all that wealth and those incredible monuments.
Definitely Egypt. Then over in Anatolia, modern Turkey basically, you had the Hittites, a major military force. They were known for chariots, early iron use.
Yeah.
Very formidable.
Okay, Egypt, Hittites.
And then across the Aegean Sea, you had the Mycenaean Greeks. Think places like Mycenae, Knossos, maybe earlier, Pylos. These palace-based states controlling trade routes, known for their art. Pretty sophisticated.
So these weren't just kingdoms doing their own thing.
Not at all. That's the key. They were linked, really linked, by this huge network of trade and diplomacy.
You mentioned traders.
Yeah, imagine these guys crossing seas, deserts, carrying vital stuff like tin and copper.
Ah, the ingredients for bronze.
Exactly, the metal that defined the age, for weapons, tools, art, everything. And the kings, they wrote to each other. Clay tablets, calling each other brother.
Wow, okay, so a system of diplomacy.
A recognized system. It was an age of, splendor in many ways. Chariots, grand palaces, lots of movement of goods and ideas.
What's fascinating here is, you paint this picture of connection and prosperity.
It certainly was prosperous for the elites, let's say.
But you're saying that very interconnectedness, that was also maybe a problem.
Potentially, yes. What's fascinating here is how that same system that creates wealth and exchange also creates inherent vulnerabilities.
How so?
Well, think about it. If your entire military and economic power relies on bronze, and bronze requires tin from, say, Afghanistan and copper from Cyprus, what happens if those trade routes get disrupted? Suddenly, your whole system is in jeopardy. Strength in one place depended entirely on stability elsewhere.
Right. One weak link could break the whole chain.
Pretty much a single thread pulled, and the whole tapestry could start to unravel. It makes the system potentially quite fragile, despite appearances.
That fragility is key, isn't it? Because beneath all that Golden Age stuff, the cracks did start showing.
They did.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because it doesn't seem like it was just one thing, right? Historians talk about a perfect storm.
That's the prevailing theory now, yes. A convergence of multiple catastrophes hitting around the same time. Not just one domino, but several pushed at once.
So what were these factors? Let's break them down. Climate change is one I've heard mentioned.
A big one, potentially. We have evidence, things like pollen analysis from lake beds, sediment cores.
What do they show?
They suggest a significant, prolonged period of drought across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East around this time.
And drought means?
Crop failures, widespread famine, which leads to social unrest, populations migrating, huge pressure on governments and resources. It destabilizes everything.
Okay, so climate pressure. What else was in this perfect storm?
Natural disasters seem to play a role, too. There's archaeological evidence for major earthquakes destroying key coastal cities right around this period.
Wow. So imagine you're already dealing with drought, and then your city gets flattened by an earthquake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It just compounds the crisis, destroys ports, disrupts trade further, creates refugees. adds to the chaos.
And then you mentioned technology earlier. Iron. How did that fit in?
Well, the Bronze Age is named for bronze, obviously. It's the elite material, requires those complex trade routes we talked about.
Right.
Iron starts appearing more widely around this time,
Right.
and iron ore is much more common than tin or copper. It's potentially cheaper, easier to get, and makes stronger tools and weapons.
So a technological disruption.
Potentially, yeah. It could undermine the power structures built on controlling bronze production and trade. Maybe new groups could arm themselves more easily. It hints at a shift, a change in the balance of power.
Okay, climate, earthquakes, maybe iron technology. And then there's the really mysterious one, the Sea Peoples.
Ah, yes. The Sea Peoples. Always cropping up in the Egyptian records, especially.
Who were they? Do we even know?
That's the million-dollar question. The sources, mainly Egyptian inscriptions like at Medinet Habu, depict them as these coalitions of groups attacking by land and sea. Some names are mentioned, like Peliset, Cheker, Shekelish, but linking them definitively to known peoples is really difficult.
So they're like pirates, raiders, migrants pushed by the other crises.
Probably a mix of all of the above. They seem to be moving groups, displaced perhaps by famine or conflict elsewhere, looking for new places to settle, sometimes violently. They appear as this major external pressure hitting these already stressed empires.
This raises an important question then. With all these factors, drought, earthquakes, new tech, invaders, was there one main trigger? Or did it really need all of them hitting together?
That's the core of the debate, really. Could any one of these have caused such a widespread collapse on its own? Maybe not. The consensus increasingly points towards that perfect storm idea, that it was the sheer combination, the interaction of these pressures that overwhelmed the system.
Like the system just couldn't cope with so many hits at once.
Precisely. Its resilience was finally overcome.
So around 1200 BCE, give or take a few decades, the dominoes just start falling. Fast.
And dramatically. Across a huge area.
We have actual evidence of this, right? Like specific examples.
Oh, absolutely. Stark evidence. Take the Hittite capital, Hattusa, a huge, powerful city in central Anatolia, burned to the ground. Archaeological layers show massive destruction. The empire basically vanishes from history after that.
Gone. And in Greece. The
Yeah.
Mycenaeans.
Similar story. They're great palaces, places like Pylos, Mycenae itself. Tiryns show signs of destruction or abandonment around this time. These complex centers just stop functioning.
Imagine living through that. Seeing these immense structures just emptied out.
It must have been terrifying. And then there's Ugarit.
The trading city on the Syrian coast.
Yes, a major cosmopolitan hub. We have letters found there, clay tablets. One famous one is this desperate plea for help.
What does it say?
Something like, "My father, behold, the enemy ships came. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." It asks for aid urgently.
Did help arrive?
No. Ugarit was destroyed shortly after. And maybe the most chilling thing. Archaeologists found a tablet still in a kiln, being baked when the destruction hit. A scribe's work interrupted mid-task, frozen in time.
Wow. That really brings it home, doesn't it? The suddenness.
It really does. It puts a human face on it. This wasn't abstract economic collapse. It was violence, fear, the end of a world for the people living there.
Even Egypt, the powerhouse, struggled.
Massively. Under Ramses III, they faced huge invasions. The temple reliefs at Medinet Habu show these chaotic battles. Ramses claims victory against these invaders he calls the Sea Peoples.
So Egypt survived.
It did, yes, but it was severely weakened. It managed to repel the main invasions, but the effort took a huge toll, and Egypt entered a long period of decline afterwards. It was pushed to the absolute brink.
And we have to remember, behind the kings and battles, this meant utter devastation for ordinary people.
Absolutely. Famine wasn't just a statistic. It meant watching your family starve. Being a refugee wasn't a policy issue. It was fleeing your burning home with nothing.
Torched villages, generations completely uprooted, losing everything. Their entire world just dissolved.
The human cost is almost unimaginable.
So what does this all mean? What happened after the dust settled, so to speak, the immediate aftermath?
Well, particularly in Greece, it led to what's often called the Greek Dark Ages. It sounds dramatic, but it kind of fits.
Dark how?
Writing largely disappeared. The complex Mycenaean script, Linear B, vanished. Literacy plummeted. Large settlements shrank or were abandoned altogether. People scattered into smaller, more isolated villages.
So a loss of complexity. De-urbanization.
Exactly. Trade networks collapsed. Knowledge was lost. Those grand Bronze Age palaces and kingdoms became essentially legends, memories whispered around campfires, maybe forming the basis for later myths.
And the big historical debate continues about the why. Climate, quakes, sea peoples, internal fragility.
Yes, the debate is ongoing. Was one factor primary? Did the system collapse under its own weight, its own complexity, making it vulnerable to any shock?
Or was it really that perfect storm needing all elements?
Most scholars today lean towards the perfect storm or systems collapse perspective that multiple interconnected crises overwhelmed the resilience of late Bronze Age societies. No single cause seems sufficient for such widespread, simultaneous destruction.
It's a pretty bleak picture. Collapse, dark ages, lost knowledge.
It is, initially, but here's the really fascinating, maybe even hopeful part of the story. Out of all that ruin, something new eventually started to grow.
The rebirth part. Okay.
Yes. It wasn't immediate, obviously, but from the wreckage, new foundations were laid.
Like what? What emerged from the ashes?
Well, in Greece, out of the remnants of the Mycenaean world, slowly, over centuries, you see the beginnings of what becomes classical Greece.
Wow. The birthplace of democracy, philosophy
Yeah.
that came out of this?
The roots are there, yes. The collapse cleared the way for new forms of social organization, new settlements like the polis, the city-state, to eventually emerge. It wasn't a direct continuation, but a transformation.
Okay, that's huge. What else?
Think about the Phoenicians. They were around during the Bronze Age, mainly as traders based in cities like Tyre and Sidon on the Lebanese coast.
Right.
After the collapse decimated the old powers, a vacuum was created in Mediterranean trade. The Phoenicians stepped into it. They became the dominant maritime traders for centuries.
And they're famous for something else too, right?
Yeah, their alphabet. They developed this incredibly efficient alphabetic script, just 22 symbols or so representing consonants, much simpler than complex cuneiform or hieroglyphs.
Which made writing easier,
Yes.
more accessible.
Hugely. The Greeks later adapted it, added vowels, and it became the ancestor of our own alphabet. It revolutionized communication and literacy, a major innovation born from the post-collapse era.
Amazing. What about Egypt?
Egypt endured, as we said, weakened, yes, facing internal struggles and losing its empire, but the core civilization along the Nile continued. It showed remarkable resilience.
And that iron technology we mentioned.
That became widespread after the collapse. The disruption of bronze trade routes likely accelerated the adoption of iron, and because iron was more common...
Is more accessible to more people.
Exactly. Stronger tools for farming, better weapons perhaps available to more people. It truly ushered in a new age, the Iron Age, with different possibilities and maybe even different social structures.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what does this pattern tell us?
It suggests that collapse, while devastating, isn't always the final word. It can act as a powerful catalyst for change.
How so?
When old, perhaps rigid systems break down, it creates space. Space for innovation, for new ideas, for different groups to rise, for new ways of organizing society to emerge. It forces adaptation.
So it's like a reset button almost.
In a way, yes. A very harsh reset button. But it shows that destruction can, paradoxically, lead to creativity and the formation of new, sometimes more resilient structures. It's a cycle we see repeated in history.
What an incredible story we've covered. From this dazzling, interconnected Bronze Age world,
This first globalized age,
through that terrifying perfect storm of drought, earthquakes, invaders, the collapse
the
itself.
dark ages that followed.
And then finally seeing these unexpected seeds of renewal.
Yeah.
Classical Greece, the Phoenician alphabet, the Iron Age taking hold.
A journey through collapse and transformation.
I think the core message, for me at least, is pretty profound. It
Yeah.
really shows how even the mightiest civilizations can be fragile.
Vulnerable to nature, to external shocks, maybe even vulnerable to their own success, their own complexity.
Right. But just as importantly, maybe more so, it shows that collapse isn't necessarily the end of the story.
No, resilience is also part of the human story.
Exactly. Renewal can come from ruin. That story of 1200 BCE is as much about human resilience, our ability to adapt and begin again, as it is about destruction.
A powerful reminder.
So maybe we can leave you, our listener, with a thought to ponder. Given how interconnected that Bronze Age world was, and how multiple stresses led to its unraveling but also its eventual rebirth, what parts of our own incredibly complex modern world might be the most fragile today?
And thinking further, if challenges do arise, what unexpected forms of renewal, what surprising innovations or new ways of living might emerge from the difficulties we could face?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. When we think about ancient Rome, the image is often just pure legend, isn't it? You've got the Eternal City, those incredible legions, the roads everywhere, the Colosseum, just, well, unimaginable wealth and power.
It's a powerful image, built to last forever, or so it seemed.
Exactly. But, the material you've shared paints a different picture. How something so mighty could just crumble. Not suddenly, but over centuries. A long, slow decline.
Uh-huh. A whimper, not a bang, as you said.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into the sources that explore the fall of the Western Roman Empire. We're not just looking for dates, really. Our mission is to get at the how and the why behind this massive shift in history. To understand that slow decay, betrayals, and invasions that, well, basically reshaped the world.
And what's really fascinating here, I think, is how common the misconception is that Rome just collapsed overnight. But our deep dive today, based on these sources, it really shows the fall was, well, anything but sudden. It was this long, drawn-out unraveling, a slow erosion, full of internal problems, weaknesses, and yeah, relentless external pressure, too, that just chipped away at the foundations.
Right. So beneath all the famous marble and glory, things were already cracking.
They were. The structure wasn't as sound as it looked from the outside, and that slow decline, that's really what we want to unpack.
That framing, slow unraveling, not a sudden fall that changes everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's so easy to picture Rome at its peak as just, well, unstoppable. Its power stretched from Britain down to Egypt.
A vast territory.
And it unified so much of the known world with trade, law, order. But the material you've pulled together, it suggests that even then, trouble was brewing. So what were those early signs, those warnings hidden beneath the surface?
Yeah, that's crucial. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's clear it wasn't just about external threats, not initially anyway. By the 3rd century CE, well before the major barbarian invasions we often think of, the empire was seriously struggling internally. The sources talk about intense civil wars, generals basically declaring themselves emperor left and right. Imagine the instability.
Constant fighting for the top spot.
Exactly. It created this immense political chaos, drained resources. Get this, something like 26 emperors in just 50 years.
26 and 50. Wow. That tells you everything you need to know about the stability or lack thereof.
It really does. And alongside that, you had rampant corruption. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It sounds like it became systemic, in the Senate, locally.
So like personal gain over public good.
Pretty much. The sources suggest it eroded that sense of civic duty. And then there was the economy. Major decay there. Inflation just hollowed out the economy. The money became almost worthless.
Right. I remember reading that description in the sources about the coins.
Yeah. Coins, once pure silver, now thin discs of worthless metal. Think about what that does. Soldiers can't be paid properly. Trade breaks down.
The whole system just starts to seize up.
Precisely. And then you add the external pressure. Along those huge borders, tribes, Goths, Vandals, Franks, Huns, they're pushing harder. So Rome's frontiers, once a sign of its reach, they become this firestorm, stretching the military incredibly thin.
It's a powerful image, isn't it? An empire looking strong outside, but rotting from the inside.
Definitely. A precarious situation, even if it didn't look that way to everyone at the time.
So Rome's caught in this trap. Internal chaos, economic collapse, constant border wars, and it was just vast. Simply too large to govern effectively, as the sources say. So how did they even try to fix this? What did the emperors do?
Well, that's the million denarius question, isn't it? The sources show they did try things. One of the biggest, most defining moves came from Emperor Diocletian. He was quite the reformer, authoritarian, but maybe necessary at the time. He basically split the empire in two, east and west.
Okay, the big split. Was that seen as a solution or more like giving up on holding it all together?
That's the debate, isn't it? Your material kind of hints at that question. Was it pragmatic or just admitting it was unmanageable? What we definitely see is Constantinople rising as this gleaming new capital in the East. New energy, new focus.
A fresh start, almost.
Kind of. Meanwhile, Rome itself, the old heart in the West, it starts to wither a bit, lose its central importance.
And that split led to really different outcomes, right?
Hugely different. The Eastern Empire, we later call it the Byzantine Empire, it actually endured for another 1,000 years. It kept Roman law, culture going.
1,000 years. Incredible.
It is. But the Western Empire, well, it staggered toward collapse. Much shorter lifespan after the split.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How one half survives, thrives even, while the other falls apart. What does that tell you about resilience or maybe just shifting power?
Exactly. Different conditions, different leadership, maybe different fundamental strengths or weaknesses emerging.
And the sources are clear that this split, even if it helped the East, it didn't really fix the core problems in the West.
So let's move forward then to those moments that really shook the West, when the cracks became, well, undeniable chasms.
Right. The sources point to some really key shocks, pivotal moments, you could say,
Yeah.
military defeats, social shifts, things that really accelerated the decline, one of the biggest.
The Battle of Adrianople, 378 CE. This was devastating, a shock the empire never fully recovered from.
What happened there?
Basically, Gothic tribes who were actually settled inside Roman territory, they just crushed a Roman army. And get this, they killed the emperor, Valens, right there on the battlefield.
The emperor himself, killed by Goths.
Killed by Goths. On Roman land. Imagine the psychological impact. The myth of the invincible Roman army. Shattered.
Yeah, that must have sent shockwaves everywhere.
Absolutely. And then, not long after, relatively speaking, you have Attila and the Huns. Their campaigns across Europe were brutal. They forced huge numbers of people, waves of refugees, into Roman lands, which created chaos, strained resources.
More pressure on an already strained system.
Exactly. And Rome often lost control of whole provinces trying to deal with the refugees and fight the Huns. But what's really interesting, and something your sources bring out, is the internal fracturing happening at the same time. Loyalty was breaking down.
How so?
Well, Roman generals started relying heavily on barbarian mercenaries, soldiers who weren't necessarily Roman. So you had guys fighting for Rome one day, and then if the pay wasn't right or the opportunity arose, they might be the ones sacking a Roman city the next day.
That's risky. Relying on potential enemies for defense.
It shows a real breakdown of that Roman identity and maybe desperation, inviting the fox into the henhouse, basically.
And all this leads up to the really unthinkable moment, the heart of the empire itself being breached.
You got it, 410 CE. The unthinkable happened. The Visigoths, led by Alaric, they marched right into Rome.
Into the city itself.
Into the city. And they looted it for 3 days. The city that had conquered the world was now being plundered. The symbolic weight of that, it's hard to overstate. Your sources really emphasize this. Rome was meant to be eternal, inviolable.
Right.
And that quote you mentioned from St. Jerome, writing from Bethlehem, it captures the shock perfectly. The city which had taken the whole world was itself taken.
Wow. Yeah, that quote says it all. It wasn't just a military loss. It was like the soul of the empire being wounded.
Profoundly. It shook people's faith in the whole Roman system and its destiny.
But even after that, the Western Empire didn't just vanish immediately, did it? The sources mention this period of puppet emperors.
That's right. It sort of limped on for several more decades. You had these emperors, often just boys, mere children sometimes, who were really controlled by powerful barbarian generals.
So the power wasn't really Roman anymore, even if there was technically an emperor.
Pretty much. The real power was with figures like Ricimer or Odoacer later on. So how did it finally end? Not with a bang, really.
More of that whimper you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. The sort of official end date we usually use is 476 CE. There was this young emperor on the throne, Romulus Augustulus.
Romulus Augustulus. That name is almost tragically ironic, isn't it? Rome's founder and its first emperor combined.
Right. Heavy symbolism there. Anyway, he was deposed, basically pushed aside, by the barbarian general Odoacer. And Odoacer did something significant. He didn't bother setting up another puppet emperor. He just sent the imperial regalia, the symbols of power, to the Eastern emperor in Constantinople.
Sort of like saying, it's over here, you can have these back.
Essentially, yeah. And at that point, you can say the Western Roman Empire was no more.
But what did that mean for, the average person? A farmer in Gaul, you mentioned. Was it just politics?
Oh, definitely not just politics. For ordinary people, it was survival. Your sources paint a picture of infrastructure crumbling, roads falling apart, trade collapsing, cities emptied out because they weren't safe or sustainable anymore. People moved to the countryside, seeking protection from local landowners.
Life must have become much more localized, more dangerous.
Absolutely. That farmer in Gaul or Hispania or Britain, they might no longer see himself as Roman at all. Their identity shifted. They were Frankish or Gothic or just local. The whole idea of being part of this huge unifying empire just sort of dissolved from daily life. It shows how these big geopolitical shifts really do change everything for everyone.
So the big question then, was this it? the end of civilization in the West, like some people at the time must have felt, seeing everything fall apart?
That's such a critical point. And connecting it all, the sources strongly suggest, no, it wasn't an end to civilization, it was a transformation. A really messy, often violent one, but a transformation nonetheless.
Okay, how so?
Well, first, as we said, the East survived. The Byzantine Empire carried the torch of Romanness for 1,000 more years, preserving law, learning, a crucial link.
The Byzantines.
And in the West itself, it wasn't just chaos and ruin forever. The ruins of Rome gave rise to medieval Europe. New kingdoms emerged from the ashes: Franks, Visigoths, Ostrogoths.
And they weren't starting completely from scratch, were they?
Not at all. What's fascinating is how they adapted Roman things. Roman law influenced their legal codes. They copied administrative techniques. They lived in former Roman cities. The foundations were still there.
So Rome's influence lived on, just in new hands, new forms.
Precisely. And another huge piece of this, highlighted in your material, is the Catholic Church. Remember, it started as a persecuted religion in the empire, but by this time it became arguably the unifying force of a fractured continent.
How did it manage that?
It provided structure, administration, education through monasteries, a shared sense of identity when the political unity was gone. It stepped into the vacuum in many ways.
That's a really important point. So it sounds like Rome never truly died.
I think that's a fair way to put it. Its language, Latin, evolved into the Romance languages. Its laws are the bedrock of many legal systems today. Its roads, its engineering, its ideas about republics and empires, even its dreams, you could say, they still run through our world. The physical empire fell, but its shadow endures, as the source material suggests. It just transformed.
That's a much more nuanced picture than just collapse, an enduring shadow. I like that. So, to recap our deep dive today, the sources clearly show Rome's fall wasn't sudden. It was this slow, complex unraveling, driven by internal problems, corruption, ambition, economic stress, and relentless external pressure.
A complex interplay of forces, exactly, not one single cause.
And it resulted not in annihilation, but in a profound transformation that shaped the next 1,000 years and really still shapes our world.
Absolutely. And the power in these sources, I think, is showing how that happens. How even the mightiest systems can decay slowly from within, often in ways that aren't obvious until it's too late.
Which leads to a final thought, perhaps.
Yeah. This raises an important question, doesn't it? If the sources tell us that even the mightiest empires are mortal, and that the signs of decay can be subtle and internal, what enduring lessons can we maybe draw from Rome's slow collapse about fragility and resilience in our own complex systems today? Are we good at seeing the subtle cracks?
That is definitely something to think about. How profound shifts, even gradual ones, fundamentally change things and set the stage for entirely new eras. A lot to ponder there. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Rome's fall and its incredibly enduring legacy. Catch you next time. Okay, let's start. Picture this if you can. It's 1519. You're there in the heart of Mexico, looking out over this huge lake and rising from the water. A city. Just incredible. Tenochtitlan. Canals everywhere, like streets, causeways linking it to the land, pyramids, huge.
An amazing sight, hard to even imagine properly.
Totally. And you hear it too. Busy market, gold glinting on temples, maybe the sound of drums, rituals, hundreds of thousands of people. It must have seemed, well, permanent, like an eternal empire.
It really was a marvel of, urban planning and just sheer scale, a unique vision.
Exactly. So here's the puzzle, the big question, really. How does that place, that powerhouse, fall? And fall so fast, just 2 years, basically, to what our source calls a handful of invaders. It feels wrong, doesn't it? How does that happen?
It really makes you question what power even means, right? That outward strength, maybe it hides other things, vulnerabilities.
That's it. And that's what we want to unpack today in this deep dive. We're looking at excerpts from the fall of the Aztec Empire, trying to figure out how this collision of worlds happened so quickly.
Steel, disease, politics, betrayal, too. It's complex.
It is. So our mission here is to pull out the key insights, give you a kind of shortcut to understanding those factors. Steel, smallpox, yes, but also ambition and that trail you mentioned. Hopefully you'll get some aha moments about maybe the fragility behind the grandeur.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's start with the empire itself, back in 1519. Tenochtitlan.
Sure.
Our source really paints a picture. It wasn't just big, it was sophisticated.
Oh, yeah. The source mentions the canals and causeways, the glittering gold, the humming markets and rituals. It shows, real organization.
Advanced stuff.
Yeah.
Floating gardens, the chinampas. massive temples, and ruling it all. Moctezuma II.
Right, from his palace. Surrounded by the priests, the nobles, he's overseeing this huge network across Mesoamerica.
Seems totally secure. Peak power. But, and this is crucial, our source says the empire was powerful, but fragile. Which sounds like a contradiction. What made it fragile? What's the source pointing to there?
Well, it really boils down to the tribute system. See, the Aztecs conquered loads of other groups, other cities.
Okay.
And those conquered peoples had to pay tribute. Goods, food, valuable stuff, yeah. But also forced labor, even people for sacrifice.
Right, I remember reading that. Must have caused some bad feelings.
Exactly. It made Tenochtitlan incredibly wealthy, but it bred deep, deep resentment among those forced to pay. That's the fragility the source talks about, this sort of simmering anger just under the surface.
Ah, okay. So not really one big happy empire, more like a powerful center holding down a lot of unhappy subjects.
Pretty much. Lots of internal divisions, real anger.
And the source says this was vital because it meant these strangers, when they arrived, could find allies, people who already hated the Aztecs.
That's the key insight, isn't it? The empire wasn't just dealing with Cortez coming from outside. It was already cracked, sort of, from the inside.
That makes so much sense. An external force finds the existing fault lines and just pushes.
Precisely. The invaders didn't have to create the divisions. They just had to exploit them, leverage those grievances.
Okay, so these strangers, Hernan Cortez, he shows up, and the source says his force was tiny, fewer than 600 soldiers.
Seems unbelievable, doesn't it, against an empire this big?
Completely. But it wasn't just about the numbers. He brought advantages, things the source calls terrifying and unfamiliar.
Yeah, the technology gap was huge. Think about it. Steel, horses, and gunpowder.
Things the Aztecs had never encountered.
Right. Their main weapon was the macuitl wood, lined with obsidian blades. Deadly up close, sure, but useless against steel armor.
And horses.
Terrifying. They'd never seen them. Huge animals carrying armored men, moving fast. Pure psychological warfare. And then gunpowder, the cannons, the arquebus, loud, explosive, like thunder from the gods.
The shock value alone must have been paralyzing. Not just a tech advantage, but a mental one.
Definitely. But then there were the invisible killers.
Ah, yes. The source really emphasizes this. Cortez's arrival unleashed invisible killers, smallpox and other European diseases.
This is probably the single biggest factor. Tragic, really. The source states plainly, the Aztec Empire had no defenses against them.
None at all.
No immunity. Generations of isolation in the Americas meant their bodies had never encountered these old world diseases. Smallpox just ripped through the population.
Before they even fought properly.
Yeah, it was already weakening them massively. Warriors, leaders, ordinary people, it didn't matter. You can't fight a plague with spears or bravery.
It's just devastating to think about. And the source is clear. This was more destructive than any weapon. More than the steel, the horses, the guns, this invisible thing.
It really changes how you see the conquest, doesn't it? It reminds you how interconnected biology is and how catastrophic those connections can be when there's no defense.
A silent weapon, almost.
Absolutely, and likely not even fully understood by the Spanish, the scale of it, and certainly beyond anything the Aztecs could comprehend or fight. It just hollowed out the empire's ability to resist.
So with Cortez there, his small band, his weapons, and this disease spreading, Moctezuma, the emperor, he's in a terrible spot.
An impossible position, really.
The source says he first welcomed Cortez into Tenochtitlan, but cautiously. He was unsure if he was a man or a messenger of the gods.
Right. Imagine that. Wait, is this a divine being or just a man? What do you do? That uncertainty paralyzed him in a way.
And Cortez used that, didn't he? Moctezuma's hesitation gave the Spanish an opening. He was trying to fit them into his worldview, maybe, not just seeing them as invaders.
Exactly. A strategic error looking back, but understandable given how alien they were.
But things went south fast.
Yeah.
Tensions rise, violence breaks out. And then the Spaniards do something audacious. They seize Moctezuma, hold him hostage in his own palace.
A massive gamble, but it paid off for Cortez.
How did that immediately affect things, taking the emperor captive?
Oh, it was catastrophic for the Aztecs. It shattered his authority. The emperor wasn't just a ruler, he was semi-divine, the center of their cosmos. Capturing him.
Yeah.
It was like cutting the head off the snake. Confusion, fear, who's in charge. It paralyzed the leadership.
A total power vacuum right when they needed decisive leadership most.
Precisely.
And then the final tragedy for Moctezuma. The source says his people turned against him, and he died amid chaos and betrayal.
Yeah, that's just Incredibly bleak.
Dying abandoned by his own subjects, not even directly killed by the Spanish in that moment, though they caused the situation. A huge blow to morale, right?
Absolutely. His death in those circumstances just deepened the chaos. It symbolized the whole system falling apart. Any chance of a truly unified resistance probably died with him, or at least was severely damaged.
Okay, so Moctezuma's gone, the Spanish had these advantages, disease is rampant, but it still wasn't a walkover.
Not at all.
Our source talks about La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows.
Right. A major event.
The Spaniards trying to escape Tenochtitlan under cover of darkness. A desperate night of escape, it says. And they lost hundreds of men. They got hammered.
It shows the Aztec warriors were still incredibly fierce. On their home turf, in the city's causeways and canals, they inflicted huge losses on the Spanish. La Noche Triste was a massive setback for Cortés. Could have been the end for him.
It really highlights that this wasn't easy. They were pushed to the very edge.
Definitely. Proved the empire wasn't broken yet.
But Cortés, he didn't quit. He was relentless. The source says he and his survivors regrouped. And then, crucially, they rallied native allies.
Yes, back to that internal resentment.
Exactly. He goes back to those groups, like the Tlaxcalans, who hated the Aztecs, exploits those old wounds. He essentially builds an anti-Aztec army.
This is maybe the strategic masterstroke, recognizing that the key wasn't just Spanish might, but harnessing the existing anger. These native allies weren't fighting for Spain, not really. They were fighting against Tenochtitlan, trying to break free.
So they return. With vengeance, as the source puts it. But it's not just Cortés' few hundred guys anymore. It's a much larger force, mostly indigenous warriors seeking revenge.
A coalition, really, united by a common enemy.
Which sets the stage for the final act, the siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521. A 93-day siege. Brutal.
93 days. Just think about that. A long, grinding, horrifying ordeal for everyone inside the city.
The source paints a truly grim picture. Starvation and disease ravaged the city. Smallpox must have been running rampant by then, worsened by the siege.
Unimaginable suffering, and the description, canals clogged with bodies. It speaks to the sheer scale of death. It wasn't just a battle, it was annihilation.
Just hell on earth. And the city itself physically destroyed. Once proud temples were reduced to rubble, wiping out the symbols of their power, their faith.
It was total war. Not just defeating an army, but dismantling a civilization, brick by brick.
And it ends with the fall of the capital, the capture of the last emperor, Cuauhtémoc. That's it, the end of the Aztec Empire.
Definitive end. And then, as the source notes, Spain builds Mexico City right on top of the ruins. A powerful symbol of a placement of conquest.
So, looking back at all this,
Yeah.
the legacy, our source says for the Aztec people, it was more than a military defeat. It was the end of a world.
That phrase just hits hard, doesn't it? The end of a world. It's not just about losing a war or territory. It's everything.
Their gods defeated or silenced, their empire gone, their whole way of life, their understanding of the universe just shattered. Traditions forced underground.
A complete cultural and spiritual collapse alongside the political one. The loss of meaning, almost.
But the source does end on a note of resilience. It says, but their blood, their language, and their spirit endured. Even today, traces of their culture beat at the heart of Mexico. It wasn't a total erasure.
No, absolutely not. Cultures are resilient. The empire fell, yes, but the people, their descendants, their heritage, it survived. It blended, adapted, transformed, became part of what Mexico is today. The roots run deep.
Wow. What a story. We've gone from this glittering city on the lake to its complete destruction and the aftermath. This deep dive really shows it wasn't one single thing, was it?
Not at all. A swift and violent collision, like the source says. Steel, disease, local politics, ambition, betrayal, all tangled together.
It makes you think about power, how it's never as solid as it looks, and how vulnerable even great empires can be to things they don't see coming.
Unforeseen consequences, the arrival of strangers changing everything. History turning on a dime, really, with immense human cost.
Yeah. So for you listening, as you think about this story, maybe consider this. When we look around today at systems or societies that seem really powerful, really stable, what are the potential invisible killers, the hidden resentments, the internal fractures that might be weakening them without us realizing? And what unexpected forces or maybe new alliances could reshape their future in ways we just can't predict right now?
That's a deep thought to end on, something to definitely mull over. Imagine a global superpower, one that really defined an entire century, controlled huge amounts of land, millions of lives. And then, almost overnight, it just vanishes. Not with a war, not with some big bang, but, well, like our sources say, with the sound of silence. Love it. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's fascinating, incredibly complex, our mission. To sort of unpack how this 70-year-old giant just crumbled, what was going on, and why was the ending, well, so quiet. We've got some really powerful sources here. They give perspectives that really paint a picture of this huge moment in history.
What's really interesting here is just getting your head around the sheer scale of the Soviet Union. I mean, for almost 70 years. It was one of the world's two main superpowers.
Yeah.
Achieved amazing things, right? Defeating Nazi Germany, getting the bomb, first man in space, shaped everything. But, like our sources show us in detail, underneath that really strong-looking surface, the foundations weren't just cracking. They were, falling apart.
Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, and this is a question for you listening, how does an empire that seemed so strong, so solid, just dissolve without a massive war or being conquered? What were those hidden weaknesses that finally brought it all down?
So let's go back, right back to the start. The Soviet Union, born out of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, this huge experiment promising a worker's paradise, a totally new way to run society where, the ordinary person was supposed to thrive, an idea that grabbed people all over the world.
Yeah, and if we look at the big picture, that initial revolutionary feeling, that hope for a perfect future, it started to go sour. Slowly at first, but you could see it by the late 20th century. Our sources really highlight this growing gap between the communist dream and just, well, the tough reality of daily life. And that led to these deep internal problems that chipped away at the government's legitimacy. Not just money problems, but belief problems too. The whole system started eating itself in a way.
And this is where it gets really interesting. That dream of a worker's paradise, it turned into just a daily struggle for so many people. The accounts we have from back then, they talk about how shortages plagued its citizens. And we're not talking small things. We're talking bread lines stretched down city streets. Can you imagine? Queuing for hours, maybe in the cold, just hoping for basics. Meat, milk, soap. The command economy creaked under its own weight. That's the system where the government controlled everything about production distribution.
Right.
It just couldn't keep up, couldn't innovate, and, crucially, couldn't consistently provide for its own people.
Exactly. The issue wasn't just that there weren't enough goods. It was a fundamental mismatch. The system cared more about heavy industry, the military, big projects, often forgetting about what people actually needed day to day. So you had this constant feeling of scarcity, which, fueled a huge black market and made people lose trust in the official way of doing things. And our sources are pretty blunt about it. Corruption was rampant. And not just petty bribes, it was deep-seated, especially among the nomenclatura, the elite, who had all these perks the average person couldn't dream of. That huge difference between the official talk about equality and the reality of these privileged lives. Well, it meant faith in the system withered for a lot of people. It wasn't just the economy failing, it felt like a moral failure too. It undermined the whole foundation the Soviet state was supposed to be built on.
So, okay, the promise was this worker's paradise. How did these everyday struggles, the queues, the corruption, actually break down the ideology that held it all together for so long?
That's key. That daily grind, seeing the corruption right there. It created this huge mental conflict for people. They're being told they live in the best system ever, but they see empty shops and know the leaders are living well. That gap, that disconnect. It just wore away at people's loyalty to the ideology. The idea that the state was really for the people started to feel like a bad joke to many. And that paved the way for a kind of cynicism that, well, later just exploded. The glue holding it together started to crumble.
Okay, so the doubts were there early on. But then we get to the 1980s, and things really start to break apart, don't they? Two big events, quite separate, but they both exposed weaknesses the system just couldn't paper over anymore.
Yes, definitely. First, there's the war in Afghanistan. Our sources say it drained resources and morale, and that's putting it mildly. People called it the Soviet Union's Vietnam. It was this 10-year mess that just bled the country dry. Thousands of Soviet soldiers died, young men were conscripted, huge amounts of money poured in while the economy at home was already struggling. And beyond the cost in lives and money, it made people really cynical. They saw their sons, brothers coming home in zinc coffins for a war that seemed pointless. It really damaged the USSR's image abroad and created this deep sense of disillusionment inside the country. It fed this idea that the government was wasteful, secretive, just out of touch.
And then, something that made those systemic flaws impossible to ignore, Chernobyl. That nuclear disaster in '86, it revealed the dangers of secrecy and mismanagement in just the most awful, visible way. This wasn't just some random accident, was it? It pointed to failures right through the system, bad construction, a culture of hiding problems. The government tried to cover it up at first, didn't they? Downplay the danger. But that quickly fell apart as radiation spread across Europe. It must have been a huge shock.
Oh, absolutely. Chernobyl was a real turning point. It made something invisible suddenly terrifyingly real. The state had always projected this image of being in control, being competent, but now it looked negligent, deceitful. They tried to block information, so people living nearby were the last to know how much danger they were in. As the truth slowly leaked out from international news for the sheer scale of the environmental damage, well, the people saw through the propaganda. Fear gave way to anger. That breakdown of trust was massive. It showed the state wasn't protecting its citizens, it was actually endangering them through its own failures and secrecy. It really fueled public anger and showed things had to change.
Which brings us neatly to Mikhail Gorbachev. He comes in, sees the Soviet Union is in serious trouble, and he tries to fix it, right? Tries to save the system.
Yeah.
With these two really big ideas, glasnost and perestroika.
He certainly did. Glasnost, that means openness, and perestroika, restructuring. These were Gorbachev's big plays to try and, well, breathe life back into the Soviet system, make it more efficient, a bit more democratic, listen to people more. He thought, a bit of transparency, some economic flexibility could fix the flaws and save it. But as our sources make really clear, instead he exposed its failures. It didn't quite work out as planned.
So what did that actually look like, glasnost, this openness? What did it mean for the average person after decades of silence?
Well, under Glasnost, the media, which had been totally state-controlled, started to loosen up. Suddenly, people could talk about things that were completely forbidden before. Stalin's crimes, the failing economy, the real cost of Afghanistan, even Chernobyl. Newspapers, magazines started popping up. Public discussion just exploded. People spoke freely for the first time in decades. And it wasn't just politics. People could finally complain openly about the empty shops, the corruption, how inefficient the party was. It felt revolutionary.
Okay, and perestroika, the restructuring part. How did that attempt to fix the economy actually go?
Perestroika was about trying to add some market ideas into the rigid state-run economy. Things like allowing small cooperative businesses, a little bit of private enterprise, giving local managers more power. The idea was to get more goods produced, make things work better. But here's the problem. After 70 years of central planning, the system just wasn't set up for market forces. It was like trying to steer a battleship with a canoe paddle. The reforms often just caused more confusion, created new inequalities, and actually made supply problems worse sometimes. So instead of fixing the shortages, perestroika sometimes made them worse, making people even more frustrated. Rather than a cure, it sort of highlighted just how rotten the economic system was.
So you've got this sudden freedom of speech combined with an economy that's kind of stumbling even more. What did that do to people and, crucially, to keeping this huge empire together?
It had huge consequences. And, for Gorbachev, totally unexpected ones. Once people spoke freely for the first time in decades, it was like opening a floodgate. Old wounds and national identities resurfaced. You have to remember, the Soviet Union wasn't just Russia. It was made up of over 100 different ethnic groups, 15 republics, many with their own languages, cultures, histories of being, well, suppressed by Moscow. With censorship gone, all that nationalism just burst out. Across the republics, voices rose for independence. People wanted autonomy, control over their own futures, an end to Moscow's rule. It really shows you the massive power, often unpredictable, of letting people speak after being silenced for so long. It let loose forces that became impossible to put back in the box.
And things started moving really fast then. In 1989, that incredible moment, the Berlin Wall fell, tearing a hole in the Iron Curtain. That wasn't just knocking down bricks. It was the biggest symbol of the Cold War, that divide between East and West, communism and capitalism. When it came down, it wasn't just about Germany. It showed Eastern Europe was breaking free, choosing its own path, shaking off decades of Soviet control. The outer edges of the empire were crumbling.
Exactly. The fall of the wall sent a massive signal that Soviet control in Eastern Europe was just collapsing almost overnight. That, plus all the unrest growing inside the Soviet republics themselves, it all led to 1991 when the Soviet Union itself was basically unraveling. And what's really fascinating that is this desperate last attempt by the hardline communists in August 91. They tried to stage a coup against Gorbachev in Moscow. These were the old guard, terrified of losing power, losing the Soviet Union they knew. So tanks rolled into Moscow, a classic scary show of force meant to scare people back into line.
But the sources tell this amazing story. Okay, tanks are scary. But the people resisted. They went out, gathered around the Russian parliament building, stood up to the coup leaders, and then you have that unbelievable image, the one everyone remembers, of Boris Yeltsin. He was president of the Russian part of the USSR, then standing defiantly atop a tank, talking to the crowds, telling them to resist. What a picture of defiance. It showed people just wouldn't go back to the old ways. They wanted real freedom, and amazingly, the coup just collapsed in a few days. Our sources are clear. The umpire was finished. That moment, that defiance, it really sealed the deal.
Yeah, that coup failure was the nail in the coffin. It showed the state just didn't have that total control anymore. The army was hesitant, didn't want to shoot its own people, the leadership was split, and the will of the people turned out to be stronger than the old guard's final try. If you think about it, it showed that even with tanks on the streets, if you don't have popular support or clear orders, an empire can just become powerless in its final days. The tools of control stopped working. And that brings us to the end, which was very quiet but incredibly profound. On December 25th, 1991, Gorbachev resigned as president of a country that no longer existed. Think about that. The leader of a superpower quitting a job that basically wasn't there anymore, and the ultimate symbol. That night, the red Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. In its place, the Russian tricolor rose. No big battle, no fancy treaty ceremony, just a flag coming down in the Moscow night.
It's really striking, isn't it? This massive thing, this global power that scared people and impressed people for decades. It ended not with war, but with the sound of silence as a flag was lowered over the Kremlin. After all the big talk, the global fights, the internal chaos, the very end was just this quiet, symbolic handover, an empire just faded out. So what's the takeaway? What does it all mean now? The collapse, I mean, it was huge. It reshaped the modern world. We're still dealing with the effects today.
Oh, absolutely. If we connected to today, its end was massively significant. 15 independent nations emerged from its ruins. That completely redrew the map of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, each of those countries trying to find its own way, often with problems left over from the Soviet era. And maybe the biggest thing, the Cold War ended not with nuclear fire, but with quiet dissolution. But that event still casts a really long shadow. Like our sources say, the legacy of the USSR still lingers in politics, in memory, in conflict. You see it in border tensions, geopolitical games, even in how modern Russia sees itself. The echoes of that collapse are definitely still with us.
It really was the end of one age and the uncertain beginning of another. Just a massive shift in history.
And our sources kind of leave us with this powerful thought, something that echoes through history. The Soviet Union, like Rome and the empires before it, proved that even the greatest powers are not eternal. They rise, they dominate, and then inevitably they fall.
Right.
So it makes you think, maybe a question for you to ponder. What does this quiet, almost anticlimactic collapse of such a huge power tell us about what power really is? Is it just military force, economic strength, controlling ideas? Or maybe the things that truly hold a society together or cause it to unravel are actually found in the daily lives, the beliefs, the quiet strength or disillusionment of its people.
Yeah.
And what could that mean for the powerful nations and systems we see around us today?